Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Nintendo Game Boy, brought to us by Bandai. The game was released in August of 1994, and the Power Rangers were well underway at that point, and came out just a couple of months before the SNES and Sega Genesis counterparts. So here we go with Mighty Morphin Power Rangers for the Nintendo Game Boy. As we begin the game, I'm going to go to the options menu and change the difficulty over to hard before beginning the game. You can select from one of the 5 original Power Rangers, and what's great about this game is that it was made with the Super Game Boy in mind, which is what I'm playing it through here. And as you can see, it has a special border, as well as the color scheme goes along with whichever of the Power Rangers you have selected. So throughout this run, I'll play as all 5 of the original Power Rangers as we lead our way towards Rita Repulsa. The game is kind of basic in its overall design. You're going to be mostly just walking over to the right and punching putties along the way. There are some other hazards like bombs that will come out, so be prepared to just kind of like step backwards or make sure you're quickly moving forward so you can get away from the bomb before it ends up dropping down. The game plays similarly to some other Game Boy games. It reminds me of some of the TMNT games, for instance. But it still ends up being a relatively enjoyable but simplistic action title. As we continue through level 1, some of the worst enemies are the ones that as soon as you're getting near, they jump towards you. It's hard to know when they are. It does it the same way every time you play, so if you remember that they're coming, you can prepare for them, but your first time through, you're probably going to get hit by a lot of the ones that end up lunging. As we reach the end of the stage, we transform into the Megazord and take on our first boss encounter against the Minion Squat. I apologize for mixing Squat and Babu's name up in my previous video. That was just a dumb mistake on my part. Here we go with Squat, who's immediately going to charge towards us. We're going to hit him with our attack. Just keep jumping over him every time he dashes underneath. The jump kick or just a straight up normal attack is good for slowly draining his health. He'll every so often stop and fire some fireballs that you'll have to jump in between in order to avoid taking damage. So be careful not to get too close when you're hitting him so that those fireballs, when launched, they don't immediately end up causing damage. If you need some extra help with the battle, you can switch off and use your special move by pressing select and then attacking. But unfortunately, using the special move and the same with the Rangers, it ends up costing health, so usually I don't use it very often. At the end of each one of the levels, there's a bonus game to complete where objects will fly towards you and your goal is to destroy as many as you possibly can. Overall, it's not that difficult. You can stay on one side and just keep hitting them. Usually, it's not too difficult to get at least 28 to 30 of the objects, depending upon which one you're doing. Level number 2, we're going to switch off and play as the Blue Ranger. As you can see, it's a cool blue color scheme, one of my favorites of the selectable Rangers here, just because of the way it ends up looking. Watch out for the putties that jump and then cause rocks to fall. Just kind of back away a step so you can avoid getting hit by them. There's also the nasty putties that pop out of the ground with rocks that fly. Be careful of those as well. Thankfully, some enemies will drop health from time to time, so be sure to pick that up. There's a lot of enemies that can gather on the screen when we're traveling along that top part, which is a nice way to skip at least some of them. I'm going to switch off to my weapon here just to show it for a second, but it ends up costing health, like I said, so really not that useful other than you have that longer range, but your normal attack still pretty much is effective against the standard enemies. It's just a long line of these putty soldiers that you just have to keep attacking one after another after another. Just keep moving forward, take either the upper or lower path at any point. Usually the upper path is a little safer as we reach the end and transform into the Megazord. For this battle, we are facing off against King Sphinx, the only one of the bosses you fight in this game that only appeared in a single episode. The rest of them are the standard minions of Rita. I'm going to use my jump kick to hit him when he's in the air. Every so often he'll drop on down, he'll cause like sand towers to appear and start moving. Thankfully they're relatively easy to kind of jump over and between. Thankfully, every time you hit the boss, they stun for a second, and this gives you a great opportunity to prepare for whatever you're going to do next. Sometimes he will throw out some rocks as he runs back and forth. They're a little bit of a nuisance that you can duck underneath or try to jump over if you back up a little bit, but usually I just end up taking a couple of hits from them as I finish him off. Right after that, it's time for another one of the bonus games. This time we have to hit rocks. This is a little bit harder because of the way they bounce, but you eventually get used to the styles and the way they come onto the screen so you know where they're going to go, whether you have to be standing or ducking in order to hit them. Level number 3 is a fire-themed stage, and finally changes up the gameplay a little bit where we're heading up instead of just going to the right this time. Be very careful moving up these platforms, it can be a bit tricky for sure. You gotta climb all the way up and do a long jump over here to the right where you can land safely on the next platform. There's the annoying spikes pretty much lining every one of these platforms as we're traveling up, so we gotta be very cautious, avoiding some enemies and making the jumps where we need them to go. Don't jump too high there with that one jump and hit that spike on the ceiling, but eventually we come to the top and reach the end of the first area. The next area has you just running through a hallway. Be careful not to jump too much because you may jump high enough to hit the spikes above, and deal with all of the putty soldiers along the way. Here we have to do a couple of little jumps to avoid some spikes, and you can do a nice jump kick in the air to take out the floating enemies. As we reach the end of the segment, it's now time to descend instead of ascend. Be careful going down level by level with the putties with the grenades. They're extremely annoying. As well as where you land, there's going to be spikes, sometimes right against the wall and other times a little bit away from the wall to try to trick you into landing on them. Sometimes if I get hit, I'll just fall down a couple of floors to avoid having to do too much more as we reach the bottom and get ready for the next boss encounter. Here we battle Babu. He will fly across the screen, stopping and throwing lightning out that you can easily duck underneath the lightning shots. After he bounces back across the screen, you can hit him again. If he starts kind of just bouncing back and forth, you can kind of just go underneath of him with each one of the bounces. Overall, this fight is actually pretty easy, whether on normal or on the hard difficulty. More bonus stage fun. This time we have bats that fly towards us. You pretty much know what to expect, and it's actually a little bit easier, I think, than the rocks. For the next level, we're going to pick Kimberly, the Pink Ranger, and we get to travel in a pink cave system. Travel all the way down to start the level off, and head over to the right to enter into the next screen. As soon as you go here, though, you're probably going to be bombarded by a lot of putties. Try to do your best to take them out, and keep moving forward like always. Be careful of the little pools on the ground. They can end up hurting you if you land. It's sometimes impossible to avoid them, while also jumping and taking out putties. Just battle your way through the cave and eventually you'll come to the end where you make it to the next room and have to head upwards up these slopes, which are extremely annoying since you have to kind of jump up them while also dealing with these extremely annoying rocks that bounce around. Some of them, if you're lucky, you can do either a jump kick or punch them in the air, but it's sometimes difficult to do. If you pick up the invincibility item, be sure to run through at least a few rocks before it ends up running out. It doesn't last that long, though. You could also use your special move, but since it ends up wasting health either way, it's usually best I just try to go through as quick as I can. In the next room, watch out for some bubbles, as well as grenade-throwing putties. The bubbles, as well as that water, will end up hurting you, or lava, whatever it is, so be very careful of it. Thankfully, we get another little invincibility, so we can run through a few enemies for a second before reaching the end of the area. For this next part, start climbing up, watching out for the dripping fire from above that will cause little fires to appear on the ground. Not too long of an area though before we reach the top, and once again heading over to the right. These bubbles and drips can be extremely annoying, just take your time slowly, one step at a time. At the end of this area, it's time for the next boss encounter. This time around, it's Goldar. Goldar will fire skulls out that kind of loop around. You can actually hit the skulls, but it takes 2 hits in order to destroy them. So a lot of times I just jump over them, delivering a kick to Goldar when I do, and then following that up with a backwards jump to get over the skull, and then repeat the process. He will sometimes do a stomp move instead with lightning that will end up start coming down as we get near the end of this fight, so be careful of that. The skulls, though, are pretty easy to dodge for the most part. For this bonus game, the final of the bonus games we're going to be completing, this one has the skulls that Goldar was throwing at us. Some of them can attack you from behind, so you have to be careful of them. It's the later part of it where you have to worry about it, but they usually end up catching me off guard as I'm trying to destroy as many as I can. It's time to finish up the game. Level number 5, we're going to end up picking Zack, the Black Ranger, in order to complete the final encounters. As we begin the level, you're immediately hit by lightning, so be careful of that. If you wait a second, you can get past it, but there's a lot of this lightning coming down throughout the level, so you kind of got to get used to stepping in between. At the end of the area, we get a little cutscene of an elevator as we rise up to the next floor. Here we have to travel upwards. These grenade-throwing putties are extremely annoying as you're trying to get over, just because they are non-stop. I get hit at least once or twice before I'm finally able to get up there. You can destroy the grenades in midair, but it's difficult to actually hit them with your jump kick. In the next area, it's more of just going across to the right, watching out for electricity along the way. The little tiles on the ground will end up hurting you, but sometimes it's hard to jump over them while also then avoiding the lightning and putties that are coming at you as well. So sometimes I'll just forget about them and just walk on over across them. Here you have a putty that can throw a wave-like blade move. Be careful of it, but you can also destroy it with a nice kick. Just take your time going back and forth up these jumps, getting in between the enemy's projectiles if possible. Here we go one more time to the last room before we face off against Rita. As you can see, you're being bombarded with an absolute ton of putties. It's really impossible to try to avoid all of them or take out all of them without taking at least some damage. Right after the bombardment of putties, there's some bats. Watch out for those. And then continue over to the right to finish up the area, and we're moving on to the final boss fight. For this fight against Rita, we're going to start off by getting close and doing a jump kick. She'll appear and throw some bats out at you. The bats can be destroyed with a nice kick, and a lot of times I'll destroy the bats as I'm kicking towards her. So I destroy a bat while also dealing some damage to her. Sometimes you'll fly across the screen. It can be hard to dodge her with this. Just keep delivering powerful attacks while dodging as much as you can of her projectiles and her just overall body, as it takes up a lot of screen space. Once you deliver the final hit though, you can sit back and enjoy the ending, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on the Nintendo Game Boy. So, there you have it, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on the Nintendo Game Boy. If you beat it on normal, you just get the message of playing it on hard and get the true ending, which isn't really that much different than the bad ending. But either way, there you guys have it. One of the first Power Ranger games I played, I had this one and the SNES ones first, and played my friend's Sega Genesis one quite a bit. Even though it's not the greatest, I do like these simple kind of action titles, like I mentioned early in the play it through about the TMNT games, and reminds me of the likes of like Kung Fu back on the NES. We see the presented by Bandai screen before it goes back to the main menu. You can start the game all over again. But with that, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.